Good day. I'm Lawrence Sanford, Senior Analyst with the American Security Council Foundation, and our mission is to educate Americans on issues of national security. Our motto is peace through strength, and I'm here to discuss with you today the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, in relation to believe it or not, the huge problem of drugs in Maine and the crime cartels the CCP has instituted not only in Maine, but all over the country. And Steve just, our guest is Steve Robinson, and he just had a recent podcast with Tucker Carlson and also a Canadian who described what happened in British Columbia, Vancouver, as a pre-runner to what's happening in Maine. So with that introduction, I'd like Steve to discuss in broad scope how this unrestricted warfare of the CCP against the United States is being conducted vis-a-vis the drugs and crime syndicates that the CCP has flooded America with.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I think the story begins, broadly speaking, with the Communist Revolution in China and the beginning of the Chinese Communist Party. But for me and for my experience and my reporting, the story begins in late 2023 when there was a leaked Department of Homeland Security memo. It was really just a picture of an email that had been sent internally by Customs and Border Protection, which disclosed the existence of close to 1,000 illicit marijuana facilities throughout the United States. And being the editor of the Maine Wire and a journalist and investigative reporter based in Maine and a native of Maine, what caught my eye in that memo was that 270 of those locations were known to be within the state of Maine. The rest of them were in Oklahoma, Washington State, California. And this was unusual to me. I thought it was highly newsworthy. And so I immediately set about investigating through my source network to see if I could identify where these locations were. I contacted the reporter who broke the first story, Jenny Tare, who was then at the Daily Caller News Foundation, and had her come up to Maine. And we went around to try to find some of these sites, and embarked on really what's been a 2-year-long adventure investigating the complex web of real estate records, tax records, financial records, electrical records, city inspection records, and also doing traditional gumshoe journalism, going door to door, trying to interview the occupants of these houses, interviewing their neighbors, interviewing source networks and individuals within Maine's legal cannabis markets to try to understand the nature and the scope of this problem. And what we quickly learned was that the Department of Homeland Security drastically underestimated the scale of the problem in Maine. The original memo, which was probably concluded sometime in early 2023, estimated that there were 270 sites in Maine. I have since obtained the full copy of that memo as well as the list of properties. I have to say my list is better. My list has names, my list has much more detail, and my list also has close to 500 properties on it. And after talking with sources throughout the state of Maine, I would say that we're probably dealing with between 500 and 1,000 different residential, multifamily, and commercial properties that are owned by Chinese communist affiliated criminal groups. And oftentimes they're owned through businesses, LLCs, and other, front group arrangements that obscure the ultimate powers who control and operate those facilities. And each one of them operate as part of a sophisticated drug production network that is connected to a money laundering enterprise that stockpiles cash behind the U.S. borders to support other malign activities of the Chinese Communist Party, including human trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and potentially the support for terrorism and bioterrorism in the United States.
Steve, one thing I'd interject is that the Chinese nationals buying all the property in America, can an American buy property in China?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No, they cannot. And yet one would think that reciprocity would be a key foundation of our policy in treating not only foreign countries, but our neighbors. So if what is good for the goose is good for the gander, and I would say that we should institute laws and regulations that if Americans can't buy property in China, then the Chinese can't buy property in America. It's only fair. So it's...
Well, I'll say a couple of things on that. First of all, I wouldn't want to buy property in China. Why buy property in a crap hole country with no respect for property rights and an authoritarian regime? Property in China, for me, would have negative value. But also, I would say it goes beyond simply allowing Chinese nationals to purchase property in the United States, because one of the things that we discovered in the course of our investigation is about a third of the properties here in Maine were purchased using financing, mortgages. Most of them were purchased using cash or bank checks, but about a third of them were purchased using mortgages, and the majority of those were purchased using mortgages through a single bank in New York called Quantic Bank. Quantic Bank is a relatively young bank, but it's a special bank because it has what's known as a CDFI certification. CDFI stands for Community Development Finance Institution, and it's a U.S. Treasury Department program that subsidizes mortgages for marginalized communities. It's a program that was created in the 1990s to help migrants access financing to buy their first homes. The idea was that sometimes migrants from other countries have difficulty obtaining traditional financing, so they're riskier clients for banks to lend to. So you create this CDFI designation, which uses taxpayer funding to mitigate some of the risk for banks and increases the likelihood that they're going to loan to these individuals. In practice, what that looks like is Quantic Bank still today on its website advertises that it will loan to foreign nationals to buy property in the U.S. So United States taxpayers are actually subsidizing the purchase of American land and American houses by foreign nationals through the CDFI program. And Quantic Bank actually took advantage of this program to such a stunning degree to help, perhaps unknowingly, the Chinese drug traffickers that would establish a foothold in Maine, that one of their loan officers told me their business increased 1,000%. That loan officer happened to be a Taiwanese national who came to the United States, was living in New York, working for Quantic Bank, and was running advertisements on WeChat, which is effectively the Chinese version of X or WhatsApp. So they were targeting Chinese communities, Mandarin-speaking communities, with advertising saying, hey, we can help you secure financing through this special Treasury Department subsidized program, and you can buy houses in Maine. Now, under that program, they were supposed to be turning those properties into their first homes, but the reality is that they turned them into illegal small businesses. Each one of those homes became an illicit, black market, unregistered marijuana growing operation. In most cases, the owner of the property on paper, the person who took out the loan, never lived there and they're usually not at the properties themselves. It's almost always other people who are at the properties tending to the marijuana plants. And we can get into exactly who is tending these facilities in a minute. But if you swear in a mortgage document that a property you're lending money to buy is going to become your principal residence, and then it doesn't become your principal residence, it in fact becomes an illegal small business, that's what's known in the United States as bank fraud. There's been 4 cases where individuals who have done exactly that have been charged with bank fraud. But the previous U.S. attorney was a woman named Darcy McElway, a Biden U.S. attorney, who was tremendously reluctant to prosecute cases against Chinese organized crime. And my sources in the law enforcement community told me that everything that moved through that office was subject to the lens of political correctness, to the point where McElway told senior law enforcement outright that she would not prosecute cocaine cases. Didn't matter if it was a kilo of cocaine they caught in a traffic stop. She was not going to prosecute cocaine cases because by and large, the people bringing kilo quantities of cocaine into Maine were not white. So there was a racial lens that the former U.S. attorney applied to how she was going to prosecute cases, and Chinese organized crime proliferating throughout the state of Maine didn't fit with the kind of person that she wanted to be prosecuting. So there were some prosecutions under the Biden U.S. attorney, but certainly not to the degree you would expect given the magnitude of the problem And we've seen very recently in Massachusetts with the appointment of U.S. Attorney Leah Foley that there was at least one case, a massive case, sitting on her desk when she was sworn in. And all she had to do was give it the thumbs up. And we had an indictment of 7 Chinese nationals who are accused of running a vast money laundering and human trafficking scheme that involved marijuana grow houses in Maine and in Massachusetts. And these guys were found living in a $1.5 million house in a nice town in Massachusetts with a Porsche that had a secret compartment in it stuffed full of $300,000, and they had $75,000 Rolex watches and Cartier bracelets. They were living the high life. And that indictment revealed that they were smuggling their countrymen from China through Mexico into the United States, flying them to New England, stealing their passports, and then bringing them to marijuana houses in Maine and Massachusetts, and effectively keeping them as indentured servants, forcing them to work off their smuggling debt at cannabis houses.
U.S. tax dollars at work, yes.
Exactly. I mean, we not only created the CDFI program, we also supercharged it during COVID with additional tranches of funding. And that's really when this buying spree began in 2019 through to about 2023, 2024. And interestingly enough, Quantic Bank has never responded to any of my inquiries about their lending and how it was used or abused to facilitate Chinese drug trafficking in the state of Maine. But now that enough time has passed, maybe a year since I originally reported on how many of the houses that they financed were being the subject of search warrants for illegal marijuana activity, we've now had enough time pass where we can look back at the property records and see that all of a sudden they stopped lending to Maine. So that's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things in the houses, after they've been used to grow marijuana, is that they use a lot of chemicals, pesticides, to cultivate the marijuana. Would you go into that and the ramifications of the pesticides and these chemicals that are banned in the U.S. but somehow or other are used here in the States by the Chinese?
Yeah, so I think just top line message, every single house that has been a subject of activity is best used as practice for the local fire department. All of these houses are ruined. They're all contaminated, and they're contaminated and ruined for a number of reasons. The first is that the houses are usually gutted and reconfigured to accommodate maximally efficient marijuana growing. So they're no longer habitable. What was once a kitchen is now a marijuana growing room. What was once, a nice living room for Granny Smith, the carpet's been ripped up, there's shelving in the walls, and it's now a marijuana growing space. In addition to that, the rooms themselves have to be kept near 100% humidity and somewhere between 70 and 80 degrees in order to accommodate marijuana growing. This has the effect of allowing black mold and other types of fungus to flourish within these environments. So a lot of the cannabis grow houses that have been raided and inspected by police after the fact or abandoned by the growers because they're scared of encountering law enforcement, they'll always find a serious black mold infestation that can cause very serious respiratory problems. It's very expensive to remediate for someone who buys that house, but it's not something that you would want to expose children and young families to because it can be very, very dangerous for their health. But in terms of the chemicals that are used in order to grow the marijuana, one of the biggest problems that you have in a high temperature, humid environment like this, where lots of soils are coming in, plants are coming in, people are coming and going, is powdery mildew, mites. There's all kinds of bugs and mildews that can affect your crop. And this can diminish the value of the marijuana that you're selling. So in order to protect the value of their crop, these growers will use various pesticides and fungicides. Now, the Chinese growers aren't the only growers who would use pesticide or fungicide on crops. Plenty of Maine growers or American growers would also do that, except their products are going to be tested, and if they're testing hot with some of these chemicals, they won't be able to sell them. An ethical marijuana grower in Maine, if they start to see pesticide or mildew on a crop, they'll just cut it down and destroy it, and that's the cost of doing business. But if you're operating as part of an illicit drug cartel, and you've got a room of marijuana that's worth $50,000 and there's a little bit of mildew on it, instead of cutting it down and losing that money, you're just going to hit it with pesticides and fungicides. And the grows now in the United States have reached the point of such sophistication that they're actually importing fungicides and pesticides from sources in China. And our investigation found that they're shipping pesticides and fungicides from sources in China to residences in California. And from residences in California, they'll distribute them through to grows in California, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, and New York. We actually found a specific address in Maine, in Monmouth, Maine, that was being used as a drop center for these fungicides and pesticides. And after we reported on that particular house, 5 days later, it hit the market. What a coincidence. And then a few weeks later, there was a raid in Somerset County, and they published photographs of the Mylar bags of pesticides and fungicides that were observed at the scene of that raid, and they were identical to ones that we had obtained photographs of in California. So we know that this is a network using the same products, the same pesticides, the same fungicides. And the reason why these are so dangerous is because first of all, there's no approved agricultural use for these pesticides in the United States. There's a common chemical that some marijuana growers will use called Eagle 20. Eagle 20 is, you could buy it down at the hardware store or Home Depot or something. You could spray it on your tomatoes and eat your tomatoes, and you're going to excrete it, and you're going to be fine. It is approved for use on stuff like tomatoes that you're going to eat. However, if you spray it on something that's going to be combusted in a vape pen or smoked like a marijuana cigarette or a joint, it's going to combust and create cyanide gas. So it's not approved for use on marijuana products or combustibles. The pesticides that the Chinese are using at these grows are not approved for any use whatsoever. And they're not approved for use in conjunction with each other, and they're not approved for use as fumigants. So what we essentially have is mad scientist concoctions of ingredients being shipped here under false pretenses by the Chinese, mixed together into unknown combinations, and then burnt within grow houses or hoop houses so that the smoke coats everything in a house, including the plant material, and it successfully kills off all of the mites and the mildew and protects your marijuana plant, but it also coats everything in the house with these toxic substances. And these substances are neurotoxins. They're toxic to bugs and mildew in the same way that they would be toxic to human beings. And we simply haven't had the time to study what their long-term effects would be on people, what the half-life of these chemicals are. So we don't know what exactly would happen if, a house that has been fumigated with these chemicals is later occupied by, a middle-class Maine family. But this particular house in Monmouth, where we knew that pesticides were being shipped, we did a story about it. It later went up for sale. A week or two later, I got a phone call from a grandmother who had taken a tour of the house as a prospective buyer. And she had two of her grandchildren with her. And after 5 minutes of walking through the house, all three of them developed respiratory symptoms, burning eyes, burning nose, shortness of breath. So if that's any indication of the symptoms that people will experience after exposure to these fungicides, then it's something that American law enforcement and certainly people in the real estate business need to be paying attention to. Right now, they're not. There's a number of these houses that are former marijuana grows that are currently on the market being sold to unsuspecting buyers, and the real estate agents are not disclosing that they were previously used as marijuana grows and may have been exposed to these toxic chemicals.
Sounds to me like some future lawsuits in the works for people who buy those houses and haven't been informed by the real estate people. But let's hope.
Well, that's just the thing: is who do you sue? The owner of the house. They're not the ones making the money. The real estate agent may not know. They may have plausible deniability. The benefactors of this scheme are, the heads of criminal enterprises that are probably not named, unindicted co-conspirators. They're very careful and they're very sophisticated to keep their names off of records. And the head of this particular snake is probably in Beijing. So if you can find a way to sue the head of a criminal organization who is currently located in China, please let me know. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would love to know the legal strategy involved there.
Well, from a criminal viewpoint, growing marijuana is not as high return, say, as producing fentanyl. But from a security angle, a safety angle, it's sort of a low-risk way to make money. Would that be a fair assessment of marijuana versus, say, fentanyl drugs or cocaine?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, and that's why the Chinese drug cartels have gravitated towards it. It's extremely low risk. They were able to get away with it for a very long time. There's very little attention paid to it until we started reporting on it and drawing connections between all the different properties and showing that it wasn't just, one-off plucky Chinese immigrants trying to, make an extra buck, that it was in fact a sophisticated network with links to human trafficking and money laundering and other narcotics trafficking. But they were able to fly under the radar. And, still to this day, no one really has been punished for this. There's the 7 individuals I mentioned who were indicted 4 weeks ago in Massachusetts. 6 of them have been arrested. 1 is still on the lam. They might get in trouble, real trouble, because of the amount of money laundering that was going on. But in terms of the arrests in the state of Maine, most of these people have just been charged with the felony cultivation of marijuana without a license. And typically they'll get, somewhere between $500 and $1,000 bail.
Yeah.
Someone from New York shows up, makes bail for them, and then they disappear and they're never seen again. And even if they show up to their hearings, they're very unlikely to get jail time. They might get some kind of a fine. The worst consequence that any of them will suffer is deportation, because some prosecutors in Maine have started being very diligent about felonies in cases that will lead to deportation. So that's the worst, punishment that they'll face is, a free flight back to China. But it's a matter of weeks before they turn around and they're back in the United States. So it's a very low risk activity. They're making plenty of money doing it. They're selling it at tobacco shops and head shops all across America, including especially in states where marijuana is supposedly illegal. They're selling it as hemp or THCA or THCP. They're circumventing laws all across the United States in order to sell this product unregulated, untested at a tremendous markup. And if anyone gets caught, well, nobody really gets in trouble. And ultimately, the beneficiaries of the scheme, they don't really get in trouble either. So it's very different from fentanyl, where if you're caught, in Maine at a traffic stop with a kilo of fentanyl, they're going to bring you into a interrogation room, and they're going to sweat you, and they're going to search your devices, and they're going to try to figure out if they can flip you and move up the food chain, and they're going to try to dismantle the network behind you that put that kilo of fentanyl in your hands. Whereas if you're pulled over with 40 pounds of marijuana, they're kind of just going to laugh it off.
Yeah.
They might throw the weed through a shredder or bury it or dump a thing of bleach on it or something, but you're going to get, arrested, photographed, and released.
You use the term money laundering, and it's a term that's used widely. Could you just briefly describe to our audience what you mean by money laundering? The sale of marijuana generates cash, and so how is the cash laundered?
Yeah, so money laundering is the biggest and most significant crime the world over. Money leaves fingerprints. Transfers of large money have to be recorded somewhere. Money value, it's recorded on international ledgers, whether it's the SWIFT financial system, a bank ledger. Somehow this money has to be moved around, and it has to leave fingerprints. And in order to get away with very profitable criminal endeavors, you have to find ways to clean the money or launder the money or create some kind of fictitious but plausible rationale for where that money could have come from. To give you an example that doesn't include Chinese mafia, say, John Smith operates a coin-op laundry in some small town. Because it's a coin-op laundry, he's getting a whole bunch of cash, and he's got, $200,000 cash sitting around. If he goes and he brings that money to his bank, the bank is going to ask him to file a suspicious transaction report, because any withdrawal or deposit over $10,000 in the United States is a suspicious transaction. On that report, he's going to have to file information saying where that money came from, and he better have a good explanation, because the next phone call is going to be from the Internal Revenue Services, and the IRS is going to want to know, did he pay taxes on that? because the $200,000 implies that he's had some business income, some personal income, an inheritance. Somewhere along the lines, he should have paid taxes on that money. So in order to avoid having to file a suspicious transaction report or to avoid paying taxes, sometimes what these enterprising individuals will do is bring that bag of cash to a lawyer and have a lawyer deposit the money into a trust account. These are called IOLTA accounts, or there's a different name for them in some other states, but it's a lawyer's trust account. And then the lawyer can draw a bank check against that trust account, and that bank check can be used to go buy real estate on behalf of the operator of the coin-op laundry. And now the operator of the coin-op laundry owns that piece of real estate free and clear, and there's no questions about where the money came from. He turns around and he sells it, and then he's got that money free and clear. That's just one example of how you could take dirty money and launder it into real estate or launder it into a bank check for use for anything. There's other ways of laundering money. For example, if you've got a marijuana grow and you've got $10,000 that you need to clean, you might go to a casino and you might buy $9,000 worth of casino chips, and then you would go to the blackjack table and you'd play a couple of hands of $100 blackjack, and then at the end of the night you would take your chips back and you would cash out all of those chips. What you get is money from the casino that has been cleaned. And you might owe taxes on anything that you won over your original deposit, but it pales in comparison to the taxes you would owe on the original amount of money. But now, instead of dirty drug cash, what you have is clean cash that has been given to you from the casino. You could also launder money by slipping into other income streams. If you have a cash-intensive business like a car wash, a coin-op laundry, or one of the more common ones we see specifically with the Chinese marijuana grows is Chinese food restaurants. So any of these businesses that are traditionally cash-heavy enterprises, what you do is you slip cash into your normal stream. So say your Chinese food restaurant is doing $20,000 a month in revenue. Well, you just happen to add in $30,000 a month in cash that has come from the restaurant. And when the bank asks where this money comes from, you say, well, hey, we make some really good chicken fingers. These people love our chicken fingers. We did $50,000 in chicken finger revenue this month. And that usually passes the straight face test. And once that chicken finger money hits the bank account, then it's clean and you can use it for whatever purposes you want. You're still going to have to pay taxes on it, but it's an acceptable loss rate in order to clean the money. And also I'll say sometimes cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is increasingly being used in sophisticated money laundering schemes, but those are just a few examples of
so a
money laundering
amount of cash
tactics.
is being generated. Let's discuss some of this money going to pay off government officials and organizations, civic organizations like politicians, law firms, and so forth, where all this money is going to embed themselves in our culture.
Well, I think that there's been a fair degree of reporting by Philip Lenzacki of the Daily Caller News Foundation in San Francisco and Boston about campaign contributions flowing to the mayors there. Here in New England, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu is dealing with a scandal right now because an individual connected to the Chinese Communist Party's United Front facilitated hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations to her campaign coffers. That's one way that money can flow through Chinese criminal actors into the bank accounts of politicians or to accounts under the control of politicians. The other is straight up cash bribery. You don't need to worry about laundering the money if you're paying it in cash bribes. You can let the bribe recipient worry about that. The Maine Wire, in our reporting, we've tried to shy away from the baseless accusation that everybody is just being bought off, and that's why this is allowed to happen. Increasingly, though, it's getting hard to believe that this could continue to happen for as long as it's happened, at the scale that it's happened, without someone in power wanting it to continue to happen. And we had an exchange in Albion, Maine, when we were out filming at a marijuana grow house. or an individual stopped to talk to us who was familiar with the property. And he told us that on one occasion, he noticed that the Chinese national who was there maintaining the marijuana grow, who would later go on to be arrested at a separate grow 55 miles away from there, this individual went up to him and pretended to be the code officer and just said, "Hey, this is all out of code. You got to fix this. You got to fix that. You got to fix this. You can't do that." And the Chinese guy didn't know any better, just assumed that he was the code officer, took his phone number. And a few days later, the fake code officer got a phone call from a New York area code. And the woman on the other end of the line was interested in coming to a financial arrangement to make their code problem go away. So here was at least one documented instance where a code officer in a small town of just a couple thousand people was being offered a bribe to look the other way so that they could continue to operate their marijuana grow. Now, if there was, if there was this instance, where a small town code officer was offered a bribe, how many other instances were there bribes offered? But we don't know about them because the guy on the other end of the phone said yes. Earlier this week, we reported on what I think is one of the more stunning stories that we've reported on at the Maine Wire. A town manager in a small town, Stacyville, Maine. This is a town of 400 people. She admitted to us that she accepted $100,000 from an individual named Mervyn Yan in order to partner with him for a Tier 4 adult use marijuana grow business. Just to give you some context, Tier 4 is the largest cultivation business that you can license in the state of Maine. That's 20,000 plants. That's about 5 or 6 times larger than the average illegal marijuana grow that's interrupted here. The town of Stacyville, again, 400 people. It has one mill building that used to operate as a lumber facility. That's where the marijuana grow was supposed to be. And Mervyn Yan might be a familiar name to anyone who's followed the Hunter Biden saga, because Mervyn Yan was all through Hunter's laptop as an intermediary between the Biden family and the Chinese energy company CEFC. Mervyn Yan actually testified last year in front of the House Oversight Committee about his dealings with Hunter and James Biden, and he wired the First family more than $1 million in payments for services that remain unclear. So here we have a Chinese national living in New York who was funneling money to the Biden family, also paying off a 70-year-old town manager in Stacyville, Maine, $100,000 in order to gain entry into Maine's marijuana business. And his attorney, by the way, helping him facilitate all of this, was a former Democratic lawmaker.
It's hard to grasp the magnitude of all the webs being spun by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm living here in Florida, so Florida doesn't seem to have a problem because we have not legalized marijuana. Do you think legalizing marijuana is one of the keys to the Chinese success in Maine?
You're wrong that you don't have a problem. You do, in fact, have a problem. Your problem is in 2019, the Farm Bill included a provision negotiated by Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul to legalize the sale, manufacture, growth of hemp. There are 3 species of cannabis: cannabis sativa, cannabis indica. Those are the 2 strong, intoxicating plants that are rich with THC. And then there's a 3rd species of cannabis, commonly known as hemp, which does not have as high a percentage of THC. Hemp is legal to cultivate and sell. The rationale for this was that hemp was an industrial product. You could make shirts and rope out of it. Thomas Jefferson used to grow it. It was just going to be an industrial product. But what ended up happening is that the hemp flowers were being packaged and sold off as smokable products. And what they're doing now is spraying synthetic cannabinoids called THCP on the hemp flower and selling them legally through smoke shops in states like Florida, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, states which have prohibited adult use for marijuana, but do allow hemp. So this hemp is being sold in Florida at tobacco shops and head shops And oftentimes when journalists or investigators or investors, oftentimes when they go to these tobacco shops and they buy what's being marketed as non-intoxicating hemp and they send it off to be tested, it's in fact just cannabis. And this cannabis is part of the reason why Maine, California, Oklahoma, Washington State have found themselves taken over by Chinese organized crime, because we are growing in Maine way more cannabis than could possibly be consumed by everybody in Maine. The same goes for California, the same goes for Oklahoma, the same goes for Washington State. So the only logical conclusion to draw from that is that a lot of that cannabis is leaving those states. And it's leaving those states and it's headed towards prohibition states where it's being sold under the guise of hemp. And everybody who is, part of this illicit cannabis to hemp pipeline is making money along the way. The people who are trafficking it are making money. The people who are growing it are making money. And the tobacco shops are also making money by selling this hemp. And they have an entire clandestine network of, they have a language and they have stickers and they have symbols that allow users to understand when a tobacco shop is selling, quote unquote hemp that is in fact good old-fashioned, American grown, or I should say Chinese grown marijuana. So Florida is dealing with this problem in a very big way. And I would say that there's nothing that the Chinese cartels want more than for Florida to maintain their prohibition on adult use cannabis. Because the longer Florida maintains this prohibition, the more they keep that market the exclusive domain of illegal operators who are selling untested, unvetted, unregulated hemp products.
So why wouldn't the cartels be growing marijuana in Florida, where you don't need to have the high electricity bills to keep it warm? We've got the heat and we got the water available. Why wouldn't they grow it instead of buying houses in Maine and in the middle of the winter having huge electricity bills?
Well, they probably are, but also the states that legalize cannabis permit them a degree of camouflage. California, Washington State, Oklahoma, Maine, Massachusetts, those states have all legalized the cultivation of cannabis under one regime or another. So they know that by setting up shop and growing in one of these states, they're going to blend in, and that they did successfully in Maine. Many of the marijuana grows that I encountered through our investigation had been known about by locals for a long time, including by the police, but they just assumed that they were legal. And the legalization of cannabis growing also creates a legal ambiguity where no one knows whose jurisdiction it is to do something about an illicit cannabis grow. Here in Maine, there are Democratic lawmakers who are very committed to the idea that illicit cannabis grows should be regarded along the lines of, an illicit blueberry grow or an illicit, potato grow, that this is simply, unlicensed harvesting of lobster or something, that it's just an agricultural crime rather than a criminal offense. So again, just like you have a decreased risk of arrest or further penalty by growing trafficking marijuana, you have a decreased risk of having your operation interrupted or your property seized. Because you also have to consider that these marijuana grows have a tremendous amount of capital invested in them. Some of the properties, for example, there's a marijuana grow out in the Chias that was busted. It had, in addition to it's like a $400,000 farm property. It really is beautiful. It looks out over the ocean. It used to be a farm. It would be a great place for somebody to retire if these Chinese gangsters hadn't ruined it. But it had a couple of barns and adjacent buildings, and we estimated that there was about $120,000 worth of heat pumps installed. Those heat pumps are necessary to maintain the temperature and the humidity of the various grow rooms. This facility had 12 grow rooms. It also had 4 different generators there, because they have to keep the power running no matter what, because even a short interruption of their light and heat cycle can cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost product. You have water pumps and very sophisticated water mixture and filtration systems to feed the plants. You have thousands of dollars in lights. You have, in some cases, $20,000 pieces of equipment that automatically process the bud. Lots of carpentry involved in the interior of the homes to make them more efficient for growing marijuana. And then the tax bills and the electricity bills. So at some of these locations, they've invested, $750,000 to $1.5 million. And if they're doing that in Maine, they can be reasonably sure that they're going to blend in, they're going to be camouflaged, the property's not going to be confiscated. Worst case scenario, somebody comes in, chops down their marijuana plants, leaves, and then they can spin it back up again just a few days later. Whereas in Florida, if they were to do something like that, they're probably going to face harsher restrictions.
So
I'll also say just one last thing, that these people are very politically savvy. They know that there are states where political correctness protects them. They know about states where there are Democratic politicians who will protect them. They know about states like Oklahoma, where there are venal Republican politicians who can be paid off to protect them. They're very smart and they're very savvy, and if you encounter one of them, they may dummy up and pretend that they can't speak English, but they can speak English, and they have a very acute understanding of the political and legal dynamics that they're exploiting in order to engage in this criminal activity.
Are you in favor of legalizing marijuana on a state-by-state level?
I was in Maine. I thought, I didn't like the idea of somebody spending their life in a cage because they were caught with a joint. And I smoked a bunch of pot when I was in high school and college too. But at this point, I think that the way that we did it, could not have been better designed for exploitation by organized crime groups. At this point, I don't see a practicable way back to prohibition. And I think that probably the best strategy would be some kind of federal legalization where it's more tightly controlled. I think that the state-by-state patchwork of legalization has created even more opportunities for illegal groups, because right now there's a huge incentive to break the law and traffic your product out of state. Just to give you an example, legal business owners here in the state of Maine, they cannot bring their product to New Hampshire or Vermont to sell it. Whereas illegal growers, like the Chinese growers, they can. The Chinese growers, therefore, have a huge advantage.
Yes.
So the Chinese growers are pushing down the price of the marijuana, which is creating a lot of pressure for the legal growers. And the legal growers are now saying, am I going out of business, or am I just going to do as the Chinese do and start ignoring the laws? So we've made the laws very, very difficult and painful to comply with by legalizing it in this kind of patchwork, complex way. I think an overarching federal legalization would be beneficial for everybody. I think that if the people who live in states like, say, Texas or Florida, where it's illegal, you're kidding yourselves if you think that it's not very easy for kids to get access to cannabis. I can guarantee you, any town in Florida right now, 16 and 17-year-olds can walk into a smoke shop and buy a product that looks, I got it right here. I bought this yesterday at a gas station, not a licensed dispensary. This was a gas station in Maine. It says 21 and plus. I wasn't carded for it, and the cashier who sold it to me looked like she was probably 17, and she didn't look like she was, inclined to card anybody who came into that store. She was just going to sell to everybody. I guarantee you that at every town in Florida, there's some version of a gas station or a head shop or a tobacco shop where somebody can go in there and buy intoxicating, smokable products marketed as hemp, but are in fact just good old Chinese cannabis grown in Oklahoma or Maine or Ohio or Massachusetts.
So how do you solve the problem with the Chinese gangs? They're a pretty sophisticated bunch with national backing by the CCP. So what do we as Americans do to maybe not solve the problem, but to curtail it?
They all have to go home.
Okay.
I mean, mass deportation of all of them. And also, I think that the state of New York and the state of Massachusetts are both functioning as de facto co-conspirators with Chinese organized crime insofar as they print driver's licenses and IDs for these organizations. Chinese illegal aliens can come over the southern border and arrive in New York and get identity documents, a New York driver's license within 30 days. The state of New York will give driver's licenses to people regardless of their citizenship status. Once a Chinese individual has that driver's license with whatever name they choose, they can come to Maine and they're presumed to be a United States citizen because Maine's a sanctuary state. So if you have that New York driver's license, you're presumed to be a U.S. citizen and you can get a marijuana growing license. It creates all kinds of problems for other states looking to enforce their laws. Not without even getting into, applications for welfare benefits or potential influence on elections that come with that. So I would think that the attorneys general for states that are conservative, Republican, intelligent, care about America or the future of the United States would want to band together and sue the states of New York, Massachusetts, California, Illinois, any other states where they provide driver's licenses and identity documents to people regardless of citizenship, because the negative consequences of that activity are spiraling outward and encouraging criminality in other states. I think there's a legitimate case. I think there's standing. I think an attorney general in Florida, an attorney general in Maine would have a very strong case to sue the state of New York. And I know that the Trump Justice Department is currently suing the state of New York for exactly this practice. So that has to stop. The Chinese government operates police departments in American cities and cities all over the world. And these police departments are used in order to enforce obedience amongst Chinese nationals living abroad. Every single one of those needs to be shut down, surveilled and shut down. The Chinese consulate in New York should be shut down. Their diplomats should be expelled. Ditto for their consulate in California. There should be severe sanctions. Every single Chinese academic studying in the United States should be sent home. Their visas should be revoked. Right now, the Chinese government is playing games with a Commerce Department employee, refusing to allow him to leave. Every time they do that, send 10,000 students home. There need to be severe repercussions. We need to retaliate a 10,000-fold for every single slight that the People's Republic of China commits against the people of the United States. They need to be put in place. They need to be shown that the United States is not going to sit here and stupidly allow us to infiltrate them from within. Microsoft, for example, should not be allowed to have any Defense Department or U.S. government contracts so long as they're allowing workers to work on Defense Department programs from China. I mean, this is basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm a political philosophy major, and I understand that you can't allow Chinese people working on Pentagon programs in China.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be allowed to happen. And the other thing is,
it's unbelievable, Steve, that they would allow that to happen.
it really is.
Yeah.
Well, no, I shouldn't say it's unbelievable. It's very believable, given how naive and stupid we are. I was talking with a source the other day about investigations into Chinese organized crime, and he said that there are some federal agencies and state agencies where they're not even allowed to call it Chinese organized crime. So they have to call it Flushing-based crime or Malden-based crime after the towns in Massachusetts or New York where there are Chinatowns where these, where Chinese organized crime is based out of. So they have to come up with all these euphemisms to talk about it. But the plain fact of it is that individuals who are present in the United States, regardless of whether they are Han Chinese or Uyghurs or whoever they are, if they have family located in jurisdictions controlled by the People's Republic of China, they are vulnerable to some of the most severe blackmail you can imagine. Yes. If you're here in the United States and you're working for the Defense Department as a Chinese individual, it doesn't matter what oaths of loyalty you've swore or how many polygraph tests you've passed. If somebody in the People's Liberation Army tells you that they've got your family held captive back in China and they're going to start harvesting the organs of your loved ones and selling them to the top bidder unless you transmit them state secrets, that's not a position that anyone should be put in. So individuals who have family domiciled back in the People's Republic of China, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have access to top secret data. That's just a fact. And people will talk about, racism and the protected ethnicities, the protected categories, whatever politically correct BS they come up with. But I think the United States is finally turning a corner where we realize that tolerance is not a suicide pact. You can be tolerant of somebody and you can, judge people by the content of the character and not the color of their skin.
Yes.
But that also doesn't mean that we should turn our blind eye to that almost 100% of Chinese spies happen to be Chinese. Yeah. This is not simple stuff. To solve the problem, one, you've got to start recognizing it.
Called a racist because you're addressing the Chinese issue, but.
Yeah, I mean, xenophobic, whatever. I don't even care at this point. It's not like it's some gypsy curse that's going to make me poof out of existence if some, pink-haired idiot online calls me names. But what will happen, though, if we continue to bury our heads in the sand and pretend like this isn't happening, is we'll wake up one day and maybe these criminal networks that are trafficking huge amounts of cannabis and cannabis byproducts throughout the United States, maybe one day they decide that they want to send weaponized bird flu in those vials. And all of a sudden at smoke shops throughout the United States, all of these people are smoking in an intense viral load. And we've got 10,000 cities in this country with outbreaks of weaponized viruses. Maybe that is going to be the next step of this. So if people want to call me names, I'm fine with it. I've got a thick skin. It doesn't really affect me. But what I do know is that Chinese criminal groups with explicit proven ties to the Chinese Communist Party have infiltrated my state. They've infiltrated your state. They've infiltrated Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Washington State, California, and very likely the nation's capital. And I can tell you, I don't know what the magic bullet is to deal with it overnight, but ignoring it and pretending like it's not happening, that's not going to make it go away. It's not going to make any of us safer.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Is there any last, I'm out of questions, but do you have any last minute thoughts you want to talk about, or?
Yeah, well, I would just say lastly that the biggest victims of this entire scheme are the Chinese people themselves. The biggest victims of Chinese communism are the Chinese people. And time again, the people that we see at these marijuana houses who are growing marijuana are victims of trafficking. They're indentured servants. So disrupting and dismantling these Chinese criminal networks benefits first and foremost the Chinese victims. And countering the Chinese Communist Party benefits first and foremost the Chinese people. So for anyone to say that that it's politically incorrect or improper or whatever invective they might hurl at you to counter the Chinese Communist Party, they're wrong, because the best thing that could ever happen for the Chinese people is for the Chinese Communist Party to fall.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching our podcast. They can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Please review us on our website, which is www.ascf.us. And again, I want to thank Steve for a wonderful presentation and thought-provoking at that. So again, thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Lawrence.